This happened just last week during my final week at home before heading back to college. I've been debating whether to even write about it, but I can't stop thinking about what might be happening at home. My parents recently moved after I graduated high school. They'd been talking about downsizing for years, and once I was heading off to college, they finally pulled the trigger. The timing meant I'd only been to the new place a handful of times. My parents had given me the basic tour when they first bought it, pointing out where everything was and explaining some of the quirks of an older home. One thing they specifically mentioned was that the house didn't have a basement, just a crawl space for utilities. They seemed pretty definitive about that, so I never gave it much thought. My parents had left the night before for a week-long vacation, so I had the place to myself. The first night I noticed anything strange was a Tuesday. I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard this tapping sound coming from directly below the floor. It was consistent both rhythmically and volume-wise. At first, I thought it might be the heating system or maybe pipe settling, but it didn't stop, which made me second-guess myself. I should mention that the room I'm sleeping in is on the first floor of the house, so the sounds were definitely coming from underground. I got up and walked around the room trying to pinpoint where exactly the sound was coming from, but it seemed to be coming from everywhere beneath the floor. What made it so disturbing was that according to my parents, there was supposed to be nothing down there but a crawl space. The idea that I was hearing sounds from below ground level when there supposedly wasn't any livable space down there was genuinely unsettling. Eventually, the tapping finally stopped and I was able to fall asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I figured that would be the end of it. I had probably just been hearing old house sounds or an animal scuttling around in the crawl space, but I was dead wrong. Later that night, around the same time, I started hearing that same tapping sound again. Only this time it was noticeably louder. I explained it away and just went to sleep, but I remember feeling a lot more uncomfortable that night than the first. When the noises started up a third time in a row, I knew something was seriously wrong. There was a considerable escalation that night. Instead of just tapping, I heard dragging and scraping sounds, too, like some kind of animal raking its claws against something and occasionally dragging something. That's the best way I can describe what I was hearing. I kept trying to rationalize what I was hearing against what I knew about the house. The logical part of my brain kept insisting there had to be a reasonable explanation, but I couldn't think of one. The sounds were way too clear and way too purposeful to dismiss away as normal house sounds anymore. I started wondering if maybe my parents had been wrong about the basement thing or if there was some kind of utility access I didn't know about. Either way, it was freaky sitting in that dark room with nothing but scraping and tapping to keep me company. The next morning, I told my parents about what had been going on. My dad immediately told me to check the crawl space for animals, worried that maybe something had gotten in there that shouldn't have. I really didn't want to check down there, but figured I didn't have much of a choice. The crawl space entrance is right under the porch, so I had to get my hands dirty to investigate it properly. And although I was holding my breath the entire time, terrified at what I'd find down there was nothing, not even any animals. My dad seemed satisfied with that explanation and told me not to worry about it anymore. But personally, I was unsatisfied and honestly kind of frustrated with the lack of answers. I decided to look for other possible explanations. Maybe there was some kind of external access around the house I'd missed, or evidence of animals getting in somewhere else. As I was walking the perimeter, I noticed a pile of old construction materials leaning against the side of the house. Lumber, tarps, concrete blocks, stuff like that. They looked like they'd been there for a while, maybe left over from some previous renovation project. It wasn't like I hadn't noticed the stuff until then. I just always kind of overlooked them since I never had a reason not to. I started moving materials around, thinking maybe they were covering up some kind of opening that animals could use to get under the house. What I found instead was much, much worse. Hidden behind the construction materials was a storm door that had been completely concealed. It was partially painted over and obviously hadn't been used in a long time, but it was definitely a legitimate entrance. I opened it and found a set of concrete steps leading down into what was unmistakably a basement. I stood there in shock. My parents had been completely wrong about the house not having one. I didn't want to go down there. I really didn't, but I did anyway. In the limited amount of time I was down there, I realized two things. Someone had clearly been living in that basement, which I could tell from the empty food containers scattered about. And 2, whoever had been living down there was not a normal homeless person, which I could tell from the markings that were scratched into the wood foundation. There were scratch marks. They looked like tallies on one of the pillars with what looked like demonic drawings on another. Drawings of people and animals, but in a seriously messed up way. Stuff I don't want to repeat here. I didn't stay down there any longer than I had to. It was and still is the freakiest scene I've ever stumbled upon. I immediately called my parents to tell them what I had found. They were completely shocked and said they had no idea there was a basement, let alone that someone had been living in it. My dad asked me 100 times if I was sure that there was no one currently in there, and I reassured him that there wasn't. Then he said they'd cut their vacation short and come home immediately. The first thing I did after hanging up was go out and buy a heavy-duty padlock. I secured the storm door from the outside, thinking that would solve the problem and keep whoever had been staying there from coming back. That same night, I was woken up by aggressive banging and rattling coming from outside. I instantly knew what it was. Someone was trying to get back into the basement and was clearly frustrated that the door was now locked. The banging was so loud and violent that I was afraid they might actually break the door down. I remember freezing up as my heart started to race. I couldn't move. The banging stopped and that unfroze me. I crept over to the window and looked out just in time to see a figure sprinting across the backyard into the darkness. I couldn't make out any details about who it was, but seeing them flee made the whole situation feel more real and threatening. The rest of the night was kind of a blur, honestly, mostly because I was so terrified and shaken up, as much as I hate to admit it. The police did a thorough search of the house, including the basement, but obviously they found nothing. They couldn't do much beyond promising to increase patrol in the area. My parents came home the next day and they insisted that everything would be fine now that they were back. They said they'd figure out a more permanent solution together and that I shouldn't worry about it anymore. I left for college the following morning as planned, but I was and still am extremely unsettled by the whole experience. It felt wrong to leave my parents there alone, especially since we have zero information about the person who has literally been living in our house for who even knows how long. It's only been a few days since I left, and I've been anxiously waiting to hear from my parents about whether anything else has occurred. So far, nothing has, but that hasn't put me at ease at all. I can't stop thinking about those awful markings I found in the basement, especially those sadistic drawings. I can't even begin to imagine what that person has been doing down there. If I'm being real, I'm really scared that something else is going to happen. This happened when I was about 13 years old. My parents had gone out for the night, leaving me home alone. I didn't mind. I was used to it. The night started out normal enough. I made myself some dinner, watched TV, and eventually went to my room to play video games. It was late, maybe around 11 p.m., when I started hearing noises coming from the kitchen. At first, I brushed it off as the house settling, but the sounds grew more distinct. It was the unmistakable noise of dishes clinking together and cupboard doors opening and closing. I paused my game and sat there in silence, straining to hear. The sounds didn't stop. If anything, they got louder. My heart started pounding because I knew no one else was supposed to be home. I crept out of my room and slowly made my way down the hallway, every step making my chest feel tighter. The kitchen light was off, but the noise continued. I could hear silverware being moved around now, like someone was rummaging through the drawers. I was frozen with fear, standing in the hallway, listening. Then suddenly the noise stopped. Dead silence filled the air. My stomach dropped, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. I slowly peeked around the corner into the kitchen, but it was completely dark and empty. Nothing was out of place. No drawers open, no dishes moved. It was like nothing had happened. I tried convincing myself I had imagined it, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. I went back to my room, shut the door, and sat on my bed, trying to calm myself down. After a few minutes, I picked up my controller and tried to get back into my game. That's when I heard it again. But this time it wasn't coming from the kitchen. The noise was right outside my bedroom door. It started with slow, heavy footsteps, one after another, moving down the hallway. They were so clear, so deliberate that my body froze in place. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I stared at the doorknob, praying it wouldn't move. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound faded away as if whoever or whatever it was had walked back down the hallway. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat awake with the lights on until my parents finally came home. I told them what happened, but they didn't believe me. They said it was just the house making noises. But I know what I heard. To this day, I still get chills thinking about those footsteps stopping right outside my door. This happened about 6 years ago when I was still in high school. I lived in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and nothing exciting ever really happens. My best friend at the time lived just a few blocks away, so we hung out almost every day after school. One Friday night, she invited me over for a sleepover. We planned to stay up late watching movies and talking about boys, typical teenage stuff. Her house was old, really old. It had that creaky floorboard, drafty window kind of feel. I'd stayed over plenty of times before and never had an issue, but that night felt different. From the moment I walked in, I noticed the atmosphere was heavier somehow. I shrugged it off and tried not to think about it. We set up in her living room with popcorn and blankets. Around midnight, we decided to watch a horror movie, which in hindsight was probably a mistake. Halfway through, we heard a loud thump upstairs. We both froze, staring at each other. Her parents were out of town, and her little brother was spending the night at a friend's place. So the house was supposed to be empty except for us. She grabbed the remote and paused the movie. For a moment, everything was silent. Then came another sound, this one like footsteps moving slowly across the floor above us. The tension was unbearable. Neither of us wanted to go check, but we also couldn't just ignore it. Eventually, we worked up the courage to creep upstairs together. When we got to the top, the hallway was pitch black. She flipped on the light and we stood there listening. The footsteps had stopped. We checked every room, her parents' bedroom, her brother's room, even the bathroom. Nothing. The windows were all locked, and everything seemed perfectly normal. We tried to laugh it off, telling ourselves it was just the house settling. We went back downstairs and unpaused the movie. Not even 5 minutes later, there was another noise, this time from the kitchen. It sounded like someone dragging a chair across the floor. My heart was pounding out of my chest. We didn't even bother checking that time. We just sat there, frozen, clutching the blankets like they could somehow protect us. After a while, the noises stopped, but neither of us felt safe. We left all the lights on and tried to stay awake until her parents came home the next morning. We never really talked about it again after that night, but I'll never forget the feeling of hearing those deliberate footsteps when no one else was supposed to be there.